The wind was a physical force at that altitude, a roaring, freezing beast that clawed at the young faces pressed against the small windows of the C-130 Hercules. For the 28 cadets of the Silver Falcon Academy's advanced parachute cohort, this was the apex of their training. The Hell Jump, as it was unofficially called, was a high-altitude, low-opening night exercise designed to separate the potential officers from the merely adequate. Inside the cavernous, the vibrating belly of the plane, the atmosphere was thick with a cocktail of fear and bravado. At the center of the storm of whispered boasts and nervous laughter sat Maya. She was an enigma among them. At 24, she was older than the other cadets, most of whom had come straight from high school. Her face was a canvas of hard lines and quiet watchfulness, her eyes the color of a winter sea, cold, deep, and holding secrets. While the others fidgeted with their gear for the 100th time, Maya sat in a state of absolute stillness, her gaze fixed on a point in the distance. To the other cadets, this stillness wasn't a sign of experience. It was an insult. It was arrogance. Her silence was a wall they couldn't penetrate, and they resented her for it. They didn't know her story. They didn't know that the slight limp in her gait was from a piece of shrapnel still embedded near her tibia, a souvenir from a firefight in the Haditha Dam region. And they didn't know that the scars on her hands weren't from a climbing accident, as she'd vaguely claimed, but from the razor-sharp coral during a covert beach insertion. To them, she was just the old lady, a transfer student with a chip on her shoulder. The ringleader of the petty animosity was a cadet named Cole Ashford. Tall, handsome, and radiating the unearned confidence of inherited wealth, Cole was the Academy's golden boy. His father was a 4-star general, and Cole fully expected to follow in his footsteps, believing that leadership was a birthright, not something earned through sweat and blood. He sat across from Maya, flanked by his 2 loyal lieutenants, Jared, a hulking mass of muscle with a short fuse, and Kyle, a wiry, sharp-featured young man whose cruelty was always delivered with a smirk. 10 minutes! The jumpmaster's voice boomed over the roar of the engines, his voice a calm, practiced command. The red light above the cargo door began to flash. The cadets scrambled, making final adjustments to their static lines and equipment. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Cole watched Maya as she checked her rig. Her movements were fluid, economical, and breathtakingly efficient. She didn't fumble or hesitate. Her hands moved with a speed and certainty that spoke of thousands of repetitions. "Check your snaps, Grandpa," Cole jeered, raising his voice to be heard. "I wouldn't want you to fall asleep up here." Jared and Kyle laughed. A few other cadets snickered, more out of nervous relief than genuine amusement. Maya didn't even blink. She continued her check, her face impassive. "What's the matter?" Kyle chimed in, his voice a nasal whine. "Too good to talk to us? Think you're some kind of special forces badass because you can do a few extra push-ups?" This was a common taunt. Maya's physical fitness was off the charts. On the obstacle course, like she was a phantom, leaving the others in the dust with a grim, focused intensity that was almost unsettling to witness. They couldn't comprehend it, so they had to mock it. Maya finally looked up, her winter sea eyes landing on Kyle. The smirk on his face faltered for a fraction of a second. There was something in that look, a flat, unblinking assessment that made him feel like prey being sized up. She didn't say a word, just held his gaze until he was forced to look away. But Cole's face reddened. Her silent dismissal was more infuriating than any retort could have been. It diminished him, made his taunts feel like the barking of a small dog at a passing wolf. 5 minutes! The jumpmaster yelled. The cadets formed up in 2 lines, shuffling towards the massive cargo door. The wind outside was a deafening scream, and the darkness beyond was absolute. The jumpmaster gave the signal. The first cadets began to jump, disappearing into the void with a shout, and the line moved quickly. Cole was just ahead of Maya, with Jared and Kyle behind her. As the second line began its advance, Cole felt a surge of raw, ugly emotion, the culmination of weeks of her silent indifference, of being outshone by someone he deemed beneath him, boiled over. He saw his chance. It wasn't a premeditated plan, more a sudden, vicious impulse. As Maya took the final step towards the edge, her focus entirely on the door, Cole, in pretending to steady himself against the plane's shuddering frame, stuck his foot out. It was a subtle, easily disguised move. Jared, seeing what his leader had done and eager to please, gave a hard shove to Maya's lower back. It wasn't a push out of the plane. It was a violent, unexpected lurch. Maya, caught off balance by the unseen foot and the shove, stumbled. Her static line, the cord that would automatically deploy her parachute, snagged for a horrifying second on a piece of loose equipment, a heavy tie-down ring that had been carelessly left unsecured. The line pulled taut, but instead of a clean break, it yanked her sideways. She didn't jump. She fell. She tumbled out of the Hercules, a dark silhouette swallowed by the night. As she disappeared, Cole, his heart hammering with a sickening mix of thrill and fear, leaned out into the doorframe. He didn't see a struggling body. He saw nothing. The darkness had consumed her whole. He pulled back in, his face pale. Jared and Kyle stared at each other, the reality of what they'd just done beginning to dawn on them. They'd expected her to be startled, to cry out, to make a fool of herself. They hadn't expected her to vanish. "Did you see that?" The jumpmaster shouted over the wind, his face a mask of confusion. He'd only seen her stumble. "Her line must have snapped. Mayday! Mayday! We have a jumper in distress. No shoot deployment!" Panic erupted in the plane, but for Cole, Jared, and Kyle, the panic was a cold, personal dread that froze the blood in their veins. They'd just killed someone. They'd murdered a fellow cadet over a petty grudge. Maya didn't scream. The roar of the wind and the plane's engines was instantly replaced by the terrifying, all-consuming silence of a freefall. For a civilian, this would be a moment of pure, paralyzing terror. For Maya, it was a transition. At the shock of the fall, the unexpected tumble, lasted only a second before her training took over. Her mind, a machine honed by the most rigorous military training on Earth, clicked into a different gear. The chaos of the plane, Cole's petty face, the shove. It all became irrelevant data. Her entire world narrowed to a single, critical problem. She was falling at 120 miles per hour towards the black earth, and her primary chute was a tangled, useless mess because her static line had failed. And her body reacted before her conscious mind could fully process. She twisted in the air, fighting the tumble, spreading her arms and legs to stabilize herself. The wind screamed against her, a physical pressure trying to tear her limbs off, but she forced her body into a perfect belly-to-earth position. The darkness was absolute. She couldn't see the ground, couldn't see the horizon. There were only the rushing wind and the terrifying knowledge of the ground rushing up to meet her. Altitude. Now she had no way of knowing. She had to assume she was low, very low. Her hands flew to her chest, not to her main ripcord, which was useless, but to the small circular handle on her harness. The reserve chute. It was a last-ditch device designed for emergencies exactly like this. But deploying a reserve at high speed was dangerous. It opened faster, harder, and could injure a jumper if not done correctly. But not deploying it meant death. Her fingers wrapped around the cold metal. She pulled. Hard. The canvas of the reserve chute exploded from its pack with a loud whump that was audible even over the wind. For a terrifying second, the lines were a chaotic mess above her. Then, with a violent, bone-jarring jerk that felt like being snatched from the jaws of a giant, the canopy caught air. Her descent slammed from a terrifying free fall to a sudden, swinging deceleration. The harness bit into her thighs and shoulders, the pain a welcome signal of life. She was down. But she wasn't safe. She was now a paratrooper alone, at night, in the middle of a drop zone she hadn't been able to steer towards. Her radio, she knew, was useless, smashed in the tumble or out of range. She looked down, her eyes finally adjusting. She could make out the dark shapes of trees and, beyond them, the faint shimmer of a river. She was miles off course. She manipulated the steering toggles, guiding the canopy as best she could towards a clearing she could barely make out. The landing was hard. She hit the ground, tucked and rolled, the impact driving the air from her lungs. For a moment she lay still, staring up at the empty black sky. She was alive. The fact was a simple, stark truth. The question now was, what had just happened? It hadn't been an accident. She knew that with a certainty that was as solid as the ground beneath her. The shove had been too deliberate, the foot in her path too convenient. It had been an assassination attempt by a trio of stupid and arrogant boys who had no idea who they had just tried to kill. A cold fury settled over her, different from the heat of battle. This was a quiet, focused anger. They had tried to end her life because she was quiet, because she was good at her job, because she was an outsider. The sheer, pathetic stupidity of it was almost laughable. But the attempt itself was not. She gathered her parachute, stuffing the voluminous silk into a tight bundle. She checked her bearings. It's got her internal compass aligned, and began to walk. She didn't head for the extraction point. She headed for the academy. She had a report to make. Back at the academy, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The other cadets had landed safely, but the head count was wrong. One missing. The Jumpmaster's Mayday call had sent a wave of dread through the command center. Search and rescue teams were scrambled, their choppers beating the night air, their spotlights scanning the terrain. Cole, Jared, and Kyle were herded into a debriefing room. They were pale, shaking. Cole's father's influence couldn't protect him from the reality of a dead cadet. The fear was genuine, but so was their carefully constructed lie. "I don't know what happened, sir," Cole said to the investigating officer, his voice trembling perfectly. "She just stumbled. Her line must have caught on something. It was dark. We were all focused on the jump." Jared and Kyle nodded vigorously, corroborating the story. And they were just scared cadets, traumatized by witnessing a tragic accident. The investigating officer, a man named Captain Evans, noted their statements. He was a seasoned officer, and something in their body language felt off, but he had no evidence. Accidents happened. The equipment was old. It was plausible. The search continued through the night. By dawn, there was still no sign of Maya. The area was vast, a mix of dense forest and treacherous ravines. Hope began to fade, and they were looking for a body. Then at 7:23 a.m., the main gate guard called in. A cadet was approaching on foot. It was Maya. She was disheveled, her uniform torn, her face smudged with dirt and grime. But she walked with a steady, unbroken gait towards the command building. The news spread like wildfire. Cadets and instructors alike gathered, watching her in stunned silence. She ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the command center. When she walked into Captain Evans's office, Cole, Jared, and Kyle were still there, their faces etched with false grief. The moment Maya's gaze fell on them, their performance shattered. Jared's jaw went slack, Kyle's face drained of all color. Cole's carefully constructed mask of sorrow crumbled into naked terror. He looked at her as if he'd seen a ghost. In a way, he had. He'd seen the ghost of the girl he'd murdered, and she had walked back from the dead to confront him. Captain Evans stared, equally stunned. "Cadet Maya, I report." Maya's eyes never left Cole's face. "Sir, my static line was sabotaged. It was caught on an unsecured tie-down ring, but that was only possible because I was pushed. Cadet Cole Ashford tripped me, and Cadet Jared Moss shoved me out of the plane." "That's a lie!" Cole sputtered, his voice cracking. "She's crazy! She fell!" We all saw it. She's trying to blame us because she screwed up. Captain Evans held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at Maya, taking in her disheveled state, but also her calm, unwavering demeanor. You were pushed. You're certain? Yes, sir. And your parachute? The jumpmaster reported a failure. My static line failed, sir. I deployed my reserve at approximately 800 feet. Captain Evans's eyes widened slightly. Deploying a reserve at that altitude in the dark after an uncontrolled tumble, that wasn't just skill. That was a level of composure that was almost superhuman. He looked back at the three terrified boys, then at the calm, a collected woman. The contrast was stark. This is a very serious accusation, Cadet, he said slowly. I am aware of that, sir, Maya replied. She then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small waterproof case. From it, she retrieved a folded piece of paper and placed it on his desk. It was her DD-214, the official document of release from active duty. Captain Evans unfolded it and read. His face, already etched with surprise, and went through several stages of shock before settling into a profound, respectful awe. He looked from the document to Maya, then back again. He saw the scars on her hands in a new light. He saw the stillness in her posture, not as arrogance, but as the hard-won calm of a warrior. He saw the cold winter sea eyes and understood, finally, what lay behind them. He stood up. The movement was automatic, a gesture of respect he hadn't intended. He looked at the three cadets, who were watching the scene with growing confusion and dread. Gentlemen, Captain Evans said, his voice now cold and hard as steel, you didn't just push a fellow cadet out of a plane. You attempted to murder a highly decorated operator of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, a Navy SEAL, a proven combat veteran with multiple tours of duty. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The word SEAL hung in the air, a death knell. The Cole's carefully constructed world, built on the legacy of his father, collapsed in on itself in that single, terrifying moment. He looked at Maya, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the predator he had tried to prey upon. The realization of his catastrophic, irreversible mistake hit him with the force of a physical blow, and he slumped in his chair, a broken, pitiful boy. The fight was over before it had even begun. The wolf had finally shown its teeth. Yes, and the dogs had no choice but to whimper.